Man, I love fall. I woke up this morning and the valley in which we live was shrouded in fog. The tops of the hills were obscured, I couldn't see everything, and as I drove in the early morning hours, the moisture accumulated on my windshield, and I was just filled with joy, and this large smile crept across my face, which might not sound like much of anything, but I am not a huge smiler most of the time, and there are weird things like this that just invoke happiness in me. And I think in my mind it takes me back to being a kid when the fog was so illusory, so mysterious. It was this thing that obscured reality, and I was always convinced in middle and high school that zombies would somehow rise out of it. It always felt like I was living in Lord of the Rings, like some mysterious fantasy world was right there in front of me, obscured only by a wall of cloud that rested upon the earth. And you have the beautiful changing of the leaves, the colors of autumn that are cascading through our mountains here in Colorado. And for many people, that is the thing that really excites them about fall. But I'm one of those weirdos that is mostly just excited that it's cold again. And that might sound anathema to you, but I love the cold. You can always put on a little bit more clothing, you can always put on an extra blanket, but if you're too warm, there's not a whole lot that you can do. So I love getting into my studio and waking up in the morning and looking outside and it's foggy and it's gloomy and it's cold. Maybe it has something to do with growing up in England for a very small portion of my childhood. I don't really know. I just know that I like the cold. I love fall and spring and I love the fog. It's mysterious and interesting. Welcome to today's sketchbook session where evidently I ramble about the weather. I haven't done this in a while, so it seems it's perhaps about time. I think the last time I did was actually in spring when I was thinking about how lovely it was going to be that green things were going to start popping out of the earth again. So here we are, in fall. And I'm working again on some Inktober pieces. This is one of the earlier ones, this is Rise, and I decided I was bored with the square and close to square formats that I'd been working on. I was excited to do something vertical, and it seemed only reasonable working with a drawing called Rise. The moon that you can see in the upper left-hand side, I later decided I don't need. It might have been cool to have put, but I really would have had to do some detail work to make it fit the rest of the piece, as you'll see as this unfolds. Inktober has been fun this year. I suppose by the time this goes live, Inktober will likely be over. But it was a good experience, and it always has been, even the first 2 or 3 years where I didn't complete it because it was difficult to stick to. And commitment is hard. It's hard to finish things. It's an important thing to do because, if for no other reason, in the future it gives us something that we can look back on. It gives us benchmarks. Things that we can use to analyze our progress, or simply things we can hang a hat on, things we can be proud of. And so I push through things like this, even if I do get a couple days behind, which at this moment I am. Having come back from Hawaii with my family, it was difficult there to work on all the pieces, for no other reason than everything warped because of the massive quantity of humidity and moisture all the time. Finishing things is important, though. It does important things in your head psychologically, and as artists we have so many directions that our minds pull us, it might be all the more important to work things through to completion and to finish them. I find, like I did with the format of this piece, that if I stick to the same thing for too long, I get bored. I find it more difficult to finish. Literally, in this case, I shifted the format because it's more interesting to me. It's subtle, perhaps, but doing a vertical format, I haven't done any of these with any of the other drawings this year, makes it a more interesting prospect. I'm working with some limited 3-point perspective. I know that the things on the bottom have to be larger than the things that are at the top, even though they are not actually larger, perhaps. I knew I didn't want to shade in the entirety of this rock formation. That just seemed tedious. It might have looked better had I done that, but not better enough to warrant all of the extra time. The tedium is not always enjoyable, not always a fun thing. But we have to strive forward toward completing things because of those aforementioned components. And it's also important for our own progress, for our own processes. Often we work through things in the finishing of a project that are subtly different than the things at the beginning, especially in the brainstorming. I was listening to Brandon Sanderson recently, a prolific science fiction and fantasy author, talking about how you don't really know how to finish a novel until you've finished several novels. He said the quantity of people who start writing a book is very, very different than the quantity of people who actually finish a book, and that finishing a book is very difficult, and perhaps not quite as difficult as the middle of a book, but that completing a book is its own task, its own set of skills. And I think that holds true for art as well, that finishing a project, finishing a series is its own skill. I saw this a lot in the AP Studio Art class that I ran, where the students had to do a series of images that were either just to show the breadth of what they were capable of, or they were literally a series exploring a particular notion, a particular idea and concept. It was hard for most students to finish those. I remember it being hard for me when I was in high school, because you have to do 12 to 15 of these pieces. After you get through about the first 6, you're kind of stumped. You've probably used up what were your best ideas, or what you thought were your best ideas, and now you're at this point where, well, what do I do now? And often students finish those things because they're students, because there's a grade attached to it. But when you're working on your own personal projects, there isn't always that same impetus. There isn't always that same pressure. And I would wager that in those scenarios, it's actually more important. It's actually more important to finish your own things. So think about it for a second. If you finish all of your art projects that you do for your classes, whether you're in high school, college, middle school, whatever, but you don't finish the stuff that you do for you, what are you telling yourself? That the work for school is more important than your own artistic investigations, than your own dreams, especially if you're older, and especially if you want to get involved in a career that does something artistically. Is that really what you believe? And even if it is it what you want to believe? Wouldn't you rather believe that your own work carries its own importance, that it carries a weighty amount of significance in your life? That seems like a more pleasant place to be. It seems like a more pleasant manner of existence, to think that your work has purpose, that it is significant, that it warrants your time, that you should be able to tell your friends, no, I'm not going to go see that movie with you because I'm going to stay home and work on my comic because that's important. Trent Kaniga talks about this, talks about how when he was in high school, he stayed home and worked on his comic book, worked on his artwork. Now, I found some friends who were doing things similarly, and they talked online. I'm not sure how they did back then, because back then that would have been pre-Discord and maybe even pre-Ventrilo. Would have been when I was probably in middle school. So I'm not sure how he was talking to people online doing that. He said that he got old headsets like people would use at call centers, which I worked at a call center when I was young. Not fun, don't recommend, but I mean, if you need a job, you need a job. So he talks about how it was important to him to work on those things, and that he rejected the possibility of doing other things. He didn't spend his teenage years doing a lot of playing around, a lot of going and watching movies and playing video games with his friends. He spent time working on art. It was important to him, and he valued it. And if you value where you're going to go artistically, if you really want to do something, then it is important to teach yourself through action, through completing things, that those things are worth something, that they are valuable in their own right. And you can do this by sticking to stuff, by committing, by staying on that one-track mind and continuing to move forward. Sorry about the popping, it's my wrist. I'm talking like an Italian here, even though I'm not visible. Yeah. So it's important to tell yourself that, though, because just like you've probably heard before, where if somebody calls you stupid, or if you call yourself stupid long enough, you start to believe it. I think the same is true with your artwork and its validity and how important it is. If you constantly train yourself by working on other things and not prioritizing your own creative ventures, over time, you've taught yourself that they're not important, that they're not worth putting that time into. And I think it's probably much, much harder to get out of that rut. It's got to be. We as humans are such creatures of habit that it's so difficult to move past whatever we've taught ourselves. So start now. Start finishing things, start completing things. Give yourself deadlines, but make them really lenient. Be really nice with yourself, really kind. It's important to finish things. It's important to start things, obviously, but usually we don't have a problem with starting things. We start too many things, we don't finish them. Do you guys do that with books and things as well, or is it just your artwork? I would love to hear about that in the comments below. I do it with books too, where I'll start and get 100 pages into a book, and then I have way too many sketchbooks going right now because I keep starting them. I get so excited for a new medium or a new sketchbook, so I'm trying hard to finish them up right now. And I'll have some sketchbook tours real soon. I might have one in a week or so. I should have one going live. So this sketchbook will finish up soon too. I've really enjoyed working on all of the stone that has shown up in all of the Inktober pieces this year, and I feel like I finally am getting a handle on how to represent it without really looking up references and over processing everything, just varying all of the directional lines and thinking about each of those faces. I'm curious how this will transfer into my painting, because painting rock has always been kind of difficult for me. And so I'm curious. These medias usually transfer back and forth some of the collected knowledge. It's one of the things I talked about really early on in some of my video content, was how important it is to work with multiple media forms. If you tend towards doing only digital art, which so many of us do now, it's important to go work with a pen. It's important to go work with pastels, especially if you don't like getting messy like me. It's important for me to get messy sometimes with my art. I hate it in some ways, but also the soft tones and the subtle fades are wonderful, and they're beautiful. And sometimes getting out of your comfort zone is just what you need. But I would just like to encourage you, whoever you are listening to this, commit to valuing your own artwork, your own creative ventures. They're important. And they're important whether or not they make you money. It's important to finish your book. It's important to draw your characters, to write your comic book. Those things are important because they matter to you, and the universe will be a better place when they exist inside it. Even if no one else sees it and it's just you exist as a human being who have finished that thing, you will be happier, you will be more content, you will be a better form of you. So please, stick to your work, commit, finish things. And I would love to hear about them in the comments below. I would love to get a link to your Instagram or any of your work and what you're working on right now. That would be lovely. And I'm sure there are other people listening who would love to see that as well. So, as always, thank you for listening to these nonsensical ramblings that started with how much I love fall and fog and evolved into this. Please commit to your work. Please finish things. For yourself, for me, selfishly, and then also just to make the world a better place. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.